Imagine you're in the 1st century in southern Italy. You are busy with your affairs, trying to support your family and all that. Everything seems absolutely normal. Until one day, a dense cloud starts to rise from Mount Vesuvius. What you don't know is that you were witnessing the beginning of one of the greatest volcanic disasters in history. For hours, ash fell onto the inhabitants of Pompeii and Herculaneum as if it were raining fire. But that wasn't the worst. The pyroclastic flows that followed, clouds of volcanic gas at over 400 degrees, buried entire cities in seconds. This catastrophe occurred in the year 79 after Christ, and it is estimated that the eruption expelled more than 1 million tons per second of volcanic material. Its power was so brutal that it released energy 100,000 times greater than the atomic bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the time people tried to run, it was already too late. Thousands of people were buried alive, trapped exactly in the position in which they died. In the 2nd century, an imperceptible threat crossed the borders of the Roman Empire that neither swords nor legions could stop. It all began in the year 165, when soldiers returning from the east brought with them an unknown disease. No one knew exactly what it was, but its advance was unstoppable. At first, there were reddish spots on the skin, then wounds opened up all over the body. After a few days, the corpses began to fall in the streets. The symptoms pointed to smallpox or measles, but the real mystery was its speed. This is how one of the most devastating epidemics in Roman history began, the Antonine Plague. This disease claimed the lives of more than 5 million people. The army weakened, international trade collapsed, and unrest began to multiply in the provinces. But the worst wasn't the disease, it was what it revealed about the hidden cracks in the empire. In the 3rd century, year 251, a new epidemic hit the Roman Empire, the so-called Plague of Cyprian. The outbreak was so severe that in Rome alone, up to 5,000 people died per day. Alexandria, at that time part of the empire, lost more than half of its population. The probable cause was smallpox, measles, or some hemorrhagic fever, but the result was always the same. Cities collapsed, and bodies were everywhere. Food production halted, and the army was further weakened. The emperor Decius, in desperation, ordered mass sacrifices to the gods, which led to a violent persecution of Christians. What initially seemed like just a health crisis turned into a religious purge, and the empire would never be the same again. In the 4th century, an earthquake changed Mediterranean history in a matter of minutes. It was in July of the year 365 when a massive earthquake shook the island of Crete and unleashed a tsunami that violently hit the coasts of Egypt, Greece, and the Levant. In Alexandria, one of the largest cities in the world, the sea receded kilometers before returning as a great wall of water that swept away entire neighborhoods. Tens of thousands of people died in a single day, and many ships were hurled kilometers inland. The disaster caused food shortages, loss of infrastructure, and massive displacements. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, a threat was beginning to brew: the migration of the Huns, which would push other tribes towards the Roman Empire and pave the way for its destabilization. In the 5th century, Rome experienced the unthinkable. After more than 800 years without falling to any foreign enemy, it was sacked. It happened in 410 AD when the Visigoths led by Alaric entered the city and caused destruction that had a strong symbolic impact. Temples and palaces were looted, thousands of people were killed, and the imperial treasures disappeared. But the most serious thing was not the material loss, but the signal the world saw. Rome was no longer invincible. Decades later, in the year 451, Attila the Hun unleashed his most devastating offensive, invading the regions that today correspond to France, Belgium, and Germany, and leaving behind a trail of destruction, further increasing the chaos in Europe. In the 6th century, a series of events made 536 what many historians consider the worst year to be alive. It all began with the mysterious fog that covered much of the northern hemisphere. For more than a year, the sun was barely visible. Temperatures plummeted, it snowed in summer, crops failed, and a widespread famine broke out. Historical records speak of a dull sun and populations desperate in the face of food shortages. This phenomenon was caused by a series of volcanic eruptions that started what is known as a volcanic winter. And this was just the beginning. Shortly afterwards, the Justinian plague arrived, killing millions and pushing the Byzantine Empire to the brink of collapse. In the 7th century, another little-known disease wreaked havoc on the British Isles. It was the year 664 when the so-called Yellow Plague began to spread across Great Britain and Ireland, especially affecting monastic communities. The monasteries, which at that time functioned as educational, religious, and social centers, were hit hard. Many were left abandoned, and social structures collapsed in entire regions. Although the total death toll was lower than in other pandemics, the consequences were profound. Political disorganization, low vaccination rates, unemployment, and hunger. Monasteries were the ideal refuge for many people. A leadership void and cultural regression in key areas. The most serious issue was its prolonged impact. The effects were felt for generations. And while that was happening in the West, at the other end of the map, the death of Muhammad in the year 632 sparked the Ridda Wars, a series of internal conflicts that fragmented the young Muslim community and defined the future of the Islamic world. In the 8th century, the Islamic world experienced one of its bloodiest transitions. Everything erupted in the year 750 when the Abbasids rebelled against the Umayyad Caliphate. The revolt ended in the Battle of the Zab River, where the Umayyads were completely defeated. But that was just the beginning. After their fall, a systematic purge began in which almost the entire ruling family was executed. The Abbasid revolution not only changed the leadership, but also caused a period of instability, civil war, and chaos that spread across vast regions of the Islamic world. A new dynasty had come to power, but the price was a bloody crisis that lasted decades. In the 9th century, England faced a threat like never before. It was the year 865, and a force known as the Great Heathen Army, a coalition of Vikings, invaded with a clear objective, not just to loot, but to conquer. They were no longer isolated attacks on monasteries. This time, they were organized military campaigns. In the following years, the kingdoms of East Anglia, Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex would be attacked one by one. Leading the invasion were the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan, who initiated a brutal occupation that lasted over a decade. Entire towns were destroyed, and the local resistance was completely devastated. In the 10th century, China went from being one of the most advanced empires in the world to entering one of its most chaotic stages. Everything happened in the year 907, when the Tang dynasty collapsed. The fall was not immediate, but it was brutal. The country fragmented into multiple states, controlled by military leaders. This marked the beginning of the period of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, where each region was ruled by force and conflict. The internal wars destroyed crops, looted cities, and left millions dead from famines and massacres. Trade was disrupted, and the most populated region in the world entered a prolonged state of anarchy. At the same time, the Islamic world was declining under the Abbasids, and Europe continued to suffer from Viking attacks in England, Ireland, and France. The century was a global storm of fragmentation and instability. In the 11th century, religious violence reached its most extreme point. In the year 1999, during the First Crusade, the Christian knights laid siege to Jerusalem after weeks of bombardments and shortages. When they finally entered the city, one of the most brutal massacres of the Middle Ages began. Thousands of Jews and Muslims were killed. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was turned into a palace, and the Dome of the Rock into a Christian shrine. This event not only marked the beginning of centuries of conflict between Islam and Christianity, but it left a historical scar that remains open even today, 12th century. In 1177, the Crusaders achieved one of their most unexpected victories in the Battle of Montgisar. Baldwin IV, only 16 years old and suffering from leprosy, led the Christian army and defeated Saladin. But the war did not end there. It was just a truce in a war that would continue for generations. That same year, the Khmer Empire began to crack due to attacks and internal struggles. And decades earlier, in the year 1138, An earthquake in Aleppo caused more than 200,000 deaths, disrupting trade and paving the way for the rise of Italian cities like Venice. 13th century. In 1258, the Mongols sacked Baghdad, one of the wealthiest and most advanced cities of the time, causing one of the greatest tragedies in Islam. For days, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, entire libraries were burned, and canals were destroyed. With the fall of Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliphate also collapsed, and what was known as the Golden Age of Islam came to an end. At the same time, in Southeast Asia, another silent catastrophe was brewing. In the year 1257, the Samalas volcano in Indonesia erupted. The sky filled with sulfur dioxide, which reduced the global temperature. In 1258, the planet was already feeling the effects: extreme winters, poor harvests, and global famines. It was a double blow, one military and one climatic, with consequences that spread over decades. In the 14th century, one word defined fear all over the planet: the plague. In the year 1347, the spread of the Black Death began, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. At this time, if an annoying rat decided to take a nap in your straw bed, within a week you would be the next victim of the Black Death. Symptoms appeared quickly: fever, swollen buboes, and death within days. It is estimated that more than 200 million people died and that Europe lost 1/3 of its population. But the most alarming thing is that the plague came right after another catastrophe: the Great Famine of 1315, caused by agricultural failures that had already weakened the continent before the plague appeared. In the 15th century, a city that for more than 1,000 years had been a symbol of power and faith fell: Constantinople. It was in 1403. In 1453, when the Ottomans attacked it with weapons the world had never seen. After weeks of siege, the city was sacked and tens of thousands of people died or were enslaved. With its fall, the Byzantine Empire officially disappeared. This caused a refugee crisis across Europe. Intellectuals and artists fled, bringing with them knowledge that would fuel the Renaissance. But key trade routes were also lost, affecting all Mediterranean trade. That same year, the Ottomans attempted to take Belgrade. They failed, but left a trail of destruction that amplified the terror already spreading across the continent. In the 16th century, an invisible enemy crossed the ocean and changed the fate of an entire continent. In the year 1520, smallpox arrived in America with the European conquerors. At first, it was just an outbreak among soldiers, but within weeks, it turned into an unstoppable epidemic. The indigenous peoples had never been exposed to that disease, and their immune systems had no way to defend themselves. In some regions, up to 90% of the population died. In the Aztec Empire, leaders, warriors, and priests died in large numbers just when they were most needed to resist the Spanish conquest. The collapse, aside from military or political, was demographic and cultural. In less than 1 year, entire civilizations became completely disorganized, and the balance of the continent was irreversibly broken. In the 17th century, China faced a double tragedy that combined war, famine, and climate change. Everything exploded in the year 1644 with the fall of the Ming dynasty. First, it was a peasant rebellion that took Beijing, but before the rebels could consolidate their power, the Manchus crossed the Great Wall and established the Qing dynasty. The country was caught between two fronts and entered into a brutal war. At the same time, the planet was going through the coldest point of the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that caused poor harvests throughout Eurasia. The result was devastating: 25 million deaths in China due to armed conflicts, famines, and diseases. In the 18th century, nature and the climate once again allied against humanity. In the year 1783, the Laki volcano in Iceland erupted, releasing a cloud of toxic gases that covered much of Europe. At the same time, in India, a major drought caused by a shifting climate left the country without water or crops. The so-called Chaliza famine killed about 11 million people and was one of the worst food crises in history. In Iceland, a quarter of the population died from starvation and poisoning caused by the volcano. The impact was global. The gases from Laki changed the climate in Africa and Asia, worsening food shortages in many regions. And a few years earlier, in 1755, the Lisbon earthquake destroyed the entire city with tremors, tsunamis, and fires, killing up to 100,000 people and marking a before and after in the history of Europe. In the 19th century, the entire planet was affected by a single climatic event. It all began in the year 1815, when Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted in one of the most powerful eruptions in recorded history. But it was in 1816, 1 year later, when the consequences were truly felt. That year would go down in history as the year without a summer. Temperatures dropped drastically in Europe, North America, and Asia. There were frosts in June, snow in July, and endless rains that ruined all the crops. Millions of people were left without food. In Europe, there were bread riots. In China, floods destroyed rice crops. In America, entire families migrated looking for fertile land and often found nothing. In their desperation, people ate moss, roots, and stray animals. The famine was global, all because of a volcano that many, even today, have never heard of. In the 20th century, when the world was still engulfed in World War I, an even more silent threat appeared: the Spanish flu. It was in 1918 and spread at an unstoppable speed. Soldiers, civilians, doctors, no one was safe. In less than a year, the virus killed more than 50 million people, twice as many as the war itself. That same year, in Russia, the so-called Red Terror began, a brutal campaign of repression during the Bolshevik Revolution. And in the following decades, other horrors would come. The Soviet famine of 1921, which left 5 million dead, and the Holocaust, which reached its peak in 1942 after the Wannsee Conference. The 20th century witnessed Stalingrad, Midway, El Alamein, and the brutal Japanese occupation in Asia. If there was a century dominated by wars and genocides, it was this one. In the 21st century, no year has had as global an impact as 2020. It all started with isolated news from Asia, and within weeks, the unnamed bug had paralyzed the entire planet. According to official reports, there were millions of deaths, causing the collapse of healthcare systems, lockdowns, and closed borders. The world economy entered a recession. Millions lost their jobs, and the mental health of an entire generation was affected. But the pandemic did not come alone. That same year, wildfires devastated Australia, California, and the Amazon. In Africa and the Middle East, locust plagues destroyed crops. Hurricane Iota, Typhoon Goni, and other extreme weather events set records for destruction. Meanwhile, an explosion in Beirut destroyed half the city. Mass protests erupted in dozens of countries, and the world seemed to be engulfed in a storm that never ended. All that happened in a single year. Do not forget to support this type of content by subscribing and watching this one too.